Nuriyah Khan, who is a women's rights activist and is also an apostate. How did your parents accept your decision to leave Islam?
I found a lot of solace online with the ex-Muslim community. I didn't realize I didn't even know you could leave Islam. I didn't know that was a thing. My dad saw one of my profiles with ex-Muslim written in it, and then he kind of confronted me, and that's when I said, look, you've raised us to think for ourselves. This is the conclusion I've drawn from this.
Obviously, the penalty for apostasy, according to many Muslims, is death. I'm assuming that your parents never considered that. Two practices that were completely alien to Europe before mass migration: female genital mutilation, and the other one is honor-based killings.
If you're seeing a little girl from Somalia being taken to see an aunt for 2 months in the middle of a school year, that should raise alarm bells for you.
My name is Stefan Tompson. I'm the founder of UK 24, and I'm here in London interviewing Nuriyah Khan, who is a women's rights activist and is also an apostate. Nuriyah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with your family story and how you grew up.
Sure. So in a nutshell, I grew up in London in a moderate to conservative Sunni Muslim household. So I'm a third generation British Pakistani, and my granddad was the imam of the local mosque. And growing up, obviously, I had quite a close relationship with him. So there was quite a heavily Islamic influence through him in the household. But my parents were quite a lot more liberal. But having said that, I would have to go to the mosque every day after school. It was given just as much importance as school. And so we were taught to memorize the Quran in Arabic, no doubt. And I went above and beyond that, obviously, for my granddad, because we'd have like Quran recital competitions and we'd have all these extracurricular things. So yeah, I was very much into my religion growing up.
And at home, what language did you speak at home with your parents and your grandparents?
It was English with my parents, and it was a mixture of Urdu and Punjabi with my grandparents.
And do your parents speak Urdu and Punjabi well?
They do, but they're like British born, so English was more natural to them.
And would you say that the allegiance of your household, would your parents identify as Pakistani first or as British first?
It's really funny you mentioned that, because I think there was, I forgot what politician it was, Lord something. He came up with a cricket test.
Lord Tebbit.
Yes, that's it. And he had the cricket test, and I thought, in so many ways, my parents are so British, but when it comes to Pakistan versus England, they fail the cricket test.
There's a very famous cricketers called the Khans. There's quite a few Khan. I mean, Isaac Khan is a very common surname in Pakistan in general, right?
And there was a dynamic trio when my dad was in his 20s with like Imran Khan, and they'd won the World Cup. So there was a huge fervor behind Pakistan being this World Cup winning nation. So I think that added to it.
So what was the level of importance of Islam to your parents' life? I mean, did you have a special relationship with your grandfather? Is your father just as religious as your grandfather?
So I think with the second generation, they tried to kind of dabble more into the British culture of things. So, growing up, they had obviously gone to school and been exposed to drinking culture, and they had a lot to do with the gang culture that was around the area they grew up in, London, at the time. So they had come into contact with skinheads and things like that. So that made them, I think, revert back towards showcasing their culture and identity more, but they weren't actually going around flexing that they were Muslim in the same way. My granddad was just kind of an imam that kept himself to himself, but it's a very common thing in Muslim households, like the older you get, the more religious you become. In your 20s and 30s, you're kind of just trying to be a Jack the Lad and, living your life. But it was always kind of culture and religion would be merged. You couldn't really differentiate between the two, especially coming from a Pakistani identity. The whole nation was born out of religion or religious migration per se. So you can't really separate Islam from being Pakistani in that sense.
And did you travel back to Pakistan at all?
Just a handful of times. I think my dad wanted us to connect with our roots. So I went maybe 2 or 3 times as a child. And then eventually even he couldn't hack it, and so we of course.
And when you were growing up, you were wearing a hijab, you were covered. What was the level of religion? You weren't wearing a full-on burqa, but you were wearing a headscarf, a hijab.
Yeah, and that speaks to me and how seriously I took the religion personally, because my parents did not force this on me at all, which is converse to many situations we see, especially in the UK. Because my granddad was the imam and I took my religion seriously, and also the brainwashing at my local mosque was quite severe. So my Quran teacher would tell us, like, when you're 9 years old, that's the age that things should change for you in this religion. And, you know, you need to take things more seriously and you need to cover your body more. And if you want to get to heaven, this is what you need to do. So obviously, as a little girl, I wanted to get to heaven and, you know, be on the right
Jannah
path.
Is it Jannah or Jahannam?
Yeah, Jannah, exactly, not Jahannam.
Jahannam is where you don't want to go.
Exactly, yeah. So I did wear it and I was shocked that all the women around me that were elder than me weren't wearing it. But then slowly all the girls in my Quran class started wearing it one by one as well. But I was kind of, unfortunately, the trendsetter.
And your mother wore it?
No.
So in fact, what you sort of seem to be saying in between the lines is that the generation of Pakistani Muslims in the 70s, 80s and 90s was actually, to a certain extent, is this the case of just your family, or was this generally across the UK that Pakistani Muslims were actually quite moderate in some ways?
I think it was largely the case. Not many of, you know, even my mum's kind of cohort of women around her, none of them wore the hijab or covered in that same sense, you know, just for very cultural reasons. If there was like the call to prayer at a wedding or something, they'd lightly put, you have a dupatta in Pakistani culture, which is like a little light shawl. It's part of the fashion. It's not even religious. They would just lightly drape that. Nobody was wearing the full-on Islamic garb. And I think you see that more when you look at third, fourth generation immigrants now. They're getting more and more radicalized and they're going more towards the Arabized version of, you know, clothing. That was me. I was kind of taking them onto that course.
And so talk me through you walking away from religion. What was it that sort of set this journey off?
So I had seen a lot of different forms of Islam. So growing up in London, I kind of was exposed to, you know, you need to hold on to this because we're different from English people. So I really took it as a serious part of my identity, even in religious education and school. Then we were moved to the holy of holy sites for Islam, Saudi Arabia, for my dad's job. And I was 9 years old when we moved there. So again, you found yourself very lucky to be so close to the house of God in Mecca. And again, everything was very strict there. You had to wear the abaya. There was the mutawwa, which is the religious police. You can't be seen with boys or anybody that's not related to you outside of school. All of these rules, and also worse, I saw you know, would hear about beheadings and amputations. You would hear them mention them from the local mosques. So as a child, I would think, wow, this is like Islam on steroids. Like, what's going on here? And my parents would just kind of, you know, try and calm me down and say, this is a very strict Wahhabi form of Islam. It's not the one that we follow. So I had all these weird...
So even your parents were put off by how religious the Saudis, the Wahhabis were in Mecca.
Yes, Saudi Arabia, because we lived in a very Americanized compound. It was very international, but we would hear of our friends' dads being missing Father's Day because they were pulled up by the religious police and forced to go and pray, and because they weren't praying, they'd be thrown in jail for the night, and so they'd miss this entire gathering at their house. And little incidents like that would make you think, wow, this is they take their religion very seriously here. My mum would be shopping with her British friends, and they would be forced to cover their heads, even though they're not Muslim. Even if it just dropped down here, the mutawa would come around with their whips and say, cover properly.
Wow.
So seeing all those things, I think they realized wow, this is not an Islam that we know or aspire to. I read the Quran for the first time in English as an adult, because I'd read it twice in Arabic. And I just thought, wow, even as a lawyer, I could do this to somebody easily. And it made me kind of unravel the whole religion.
And that was the moment that you became an apostate?
Yeah, so that was me reading the Quran, and I read the verse for women, and I thought, wow, this is terrible. If this is the verse for women, I hate to see, what the verse is to for men about their women, but it is actually for men. The entire Quran is talking to men.
And how did your parents accept your decision to leave Islam?
At the beginning, I had to keep quiet. It's just kind of like an internal metamorphosis. You're trying to shed all your Islam. beliefs, and I found a lot of solace online with the ex-Muslim community. I didn't realize I didn't even know you could leave Islam. I didn't know that was a thing. And then eventually one day, I think my dad saw one of my profiles with ex-Muslim written in it. And then he kind of confronted me. And that's when I said, look, you've raised us to think for ourselves. This is the conclusion I've drawn from this. I'd really like you to respect it. And we finally got to a place where we had to kind of, coexist.
And your parents are still Muslim?
Yeah.
Practicing Muslims?
I would say cultural Muslims with a sprinkle of practicing because they've spent a lot of time, like we've lived in many different countries around the world, and I can see how like Sufi Islam has had a big impact on them, and different, like I've said, they've seen Wahhabi Islam in Saudi, they've seen Dubai's Islam, they've seen Malaysian Islam, they've seen Turkish Islam, so they're kind of just, everybody forges your own path. So they're not insanely practicing, but they would definitely consider themselves Muslim, yeah.
But obviously the penalty for apostasy, and according to many Muslims, is death. And some Muslims, see, not the majority, if the majority of Muslims took it seriously, there'd be a lot more killing.
Yeah.
But apostasy is an offense that is punishable by death in certain Islamic countries.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that your parents never considered that. They never thought, I'm trying to alleviate the situation.
Not, yeah.
I'm just asking, it's a slightly sort of needling question.
No, thankfully not. That's why I'm still here in front of you. They haven't handed me over to anyone that would. But that's actually one of the major things that I confronted them with about why I've left. I said, so this religion that you adhere to, it actually is asking for my death because of the fact that I don't agree with it. And this is where cognitive dissonance for Muslims really come into play, because they said, well, you're our daughter. There is no way we would ever want that for you. Or we would, it's fine. Like, leave it. Don't talk to us about it. Don't tell us why you left it. But we would never want that to be the conclusion of you leaving it. So, this is why I say Muslims, a lot of them are better than Islam.
And did you pay any social price for leaving Islam? Was this a problem in your friendship group, for example?
I did, because when you leave Islam, a lot of your worldviews change when it comes to conflicts around the world, when it comes to political figures, when it comes to public figures. So funny, like we were talking about someone like Tommy Robinson off air, just by virtue of me saying, well, Tommy Robinson might not be wrong when he's talking about Islam and the genuine threat that Islam has in the UK and, the grooming gangs, you're immediately kind of disowned by your community. He is the boogeyman. You need to hate him. You cannot be British Pakistani and side with the man. So for that, for other issues, when it comes to like the Gaza-Israel issue, taking a different stand on that, you lose so many people in the process. And then just because it gets more and more real like that, many people don't want to associate with you anymore, and they think you're kind of too radioactive. And so you just have to kind of have a clear cut of a lot of people. Unfortunately, you do lose a lot of people along the way.
One of the things that I feel compelled to ask you, it's a slightly uncomfortable topic. You grew up in a Pakistani home. One of the most heinous things that has happened in this country was perpetrated mostly by the Pakistani minority. When you were growing up, did you have any knowledge or were you aware in any way, shape or form that there was a large contingent of Pakistani men, first, second, third generation, abusing and targeting primarily white working class English girls?
Because I grew up in the Middle East and I spent a lot of my adolescence in the Middle East, I actually genuinely had no idea. It was when I came back to the UK and I realized, because I genuinely have an interest in, women's rights.
And that's going to be our next topic of conversation after we're done with this.
So yeah, that's essentially when I realized that this had happened on this grand of a scale, and it was done by predominantly Pakistani men, but most people weren't calling it out. I looked into it for the first time and I was absolutely shocked. But I will say that there is within like the Pakistani ethnicity, there is also subtle kind of racism and classism and stuff within that. So the people that are predominantly perpetrators of the grooming gangs come from an area where even most Pakistanis that I know look down on that area.
And could you explain that difference of?
Yeah, sure. So it's predominantly the perpetrators are from an area called Mirpur,
Sure.
which is in Kashmir, which is called Azad Kashmir, the Pakistani area of Kashmir. So they speak Mirpuri, and they're heavily clan based, and they're very tribal and very like extremely patriarchal and conservative. So if you come from a city, like my family comes from the city of Lahore, you're so far removed from that culture that even the practices that they do over there are considered so backwards and primitive compared to like city folk, if that makes sense. So I remember even my grandma would say things about like, oh, they do some weird things, like that those are Mirpuris, that's their culture. And there's a stark divide between what their culture is and what a lot of kind of more progressive and modern Pakistani think their culture is. Not that Pakistan is generally progressive and modern, but even within it, there is a stark divide of like, this is an extreme village mentality, if you will, compared to people who, you know, are a lot more forward thinking according to Pakistani standards.
So could you explain one of the things that when I think about the grooming gangs and what happened in this country, one of the things that particularly shocks me, outside of just the scale of abuse, and when I talk about the abuse, when I try to explain it to people who've never heard of the grooming gangs, and there's many such people outside of the UK who've never heard of the Muslim grooming gangs that operated here. The story I always go back to is the story of a girl who was in the media. She was called Lucy in 2006 in Oldham. And she went to a police station drunk, having been abused by Pakistani men. In the police station, the police turned her away for being drunk. 2 Pakistani men picked her up at the police station, raped her, dropped her off, gave her money for a bus. She walked to the bus station. Before she got to the bus station, she got stopped by a Pakistani man who took her to his home, called some of his cousins. They gang raped her a second time that night, and then left her in the street, where she got picked up by a third Pakistani. The story is, every time I say it, it's almost unbelievable that you could meet 3 different groups of men who will all gang rape you. I mean, what is the likelihood of that, right? Which sort of, but outside of just the scope of what happened to these girls, the other thing that I always think of is all of these men who were involved in the grooming. They had mothers and sisters and cousins, and there was a large amount of people who must have known, who didn't say anything, right? How is it possible that they could get away with this for so many decades? I mean, I obviously don't want to sort of shift the blame on you, Nuriyah. Yeah. Like, this isn't the point of, but you are a member of the Pakistani British community. This is a community that you grew up in. Could you give us some insights into why this could have happened?
I mean, I really wish I could mentally place myself into that kind of, you know, mindset of how that could happen. And like I said, even within communities here, we're so divided that I would assume any Pakistani that you meet would be horrified that you could even, you know, say this has happened by people who consider themselves of the same ethnicity. And for me, when I was researching into like why, because I came from the exact same angle as you, how it seems inconceivable that you that many times in a night,
that many times, right?
Yeah. And it goes back to probably what my grandma was saying, like this mentality is so different from anything we could imagine, and it's so kind of a combination of this highly like sexually constrained, perverse mindset when you mix Islam and you mix all this conservatism, and you think that seeing sorry to say this so like crudely, but seeing like a drunk white girl on the road means like she's there for the taking, because, you know, first of all, you can treat non-Muslim women very differently than you treat Muslim women. Second of all, because of the way she's dressed and the intoxication, all of this is probably adding to the she's asking for it mentality. All of these factors compound, as opposed also the fact that, you know, her parents are letting her out. The mentality is so warped. Like we struggle, even as a Western mind, even as a Pakistani, I struggle to step into it. But it's like she's out, she's drinking, she's obviously probably vulnerable, but their mentality is her parents don't care for her. She's not covered. Islamically, we have a right over these kind of women. We can discipline them. We can have our way sexually with them to teach them a lesson. And also like the wider, darker things that Tommy talks about, you know, jihad on this level through sexual violence and things like that. So all of these factors are at play. And I hate to say it because it's so dark and twisted, but it's the only explanation for why you can be doing this so consistently and passing these girls round almost as if it's like an organized terror network.
One of the elements, I was looking at the rape gang inquiry that Rupert Lowe has been leading and financing, and one of the things that came out that I sort of intuitively assumed was true, but that was confirmed by the rape gang inquiry, was the very racist element of there was a stark divide between, you know, we are ethnically Pakistani and these are white girls, and there was obviously the Islamic element as well that comes back and forth. I wanted to ask you, when you were growing up, was there a racial distinction? Did your family make it clear that you were, in the sense of, you are ethnically Pakistani, we are living in an English, and the English ethnicity obviously is white, we're living in an English/white country. Was that a divide that you grew up with? Or was that something that wasn't really... I know the issue with asking you this question is obviously you grew up in you had a very international upbringing, right? So it's not perhaps necessarily that reflective of other Pakistanis, but I was wondering if that was perhaps something that did come up.
While I was in the UK, from being born to 9 years old, via the mosque, most definitely. Like they would tell us things like just walking back from the mosque and stuff, pointing at the pub, saying, this is a place for devils. This is not where we go. Again, the word, I was actually very grateful to be asked by Rupert Lowe to contribute to some of the testimony of my understanding of what happened with the rape gangs. And time again, you see in the testimonies the use of the word Gora. And that is a very South Asian thing when discussing like white people generically or in general, that these are white people and these are us and they're different. So there's very much like an othering. This is how they behave. And I think that's why like a young 9-year-old me even wore hijab to kind of show this identity of mine where I'm British on paper and by virtue of where I live, but I need to show that I'm different from the other white people around me, or, you know, I can't eat pork like Christians can, or and I can't go to a pub and drink, and you have to show that you're different.
So this takes us to your general work, and it's working for women's rights and with girls who've been abused and women who are being abused. This is I don't want to refer to it as an industry. This is how should I refer to it? This is a sector that you work in. That's probably a more appropriate term. What are some of the things that you've been seeing, and how much of the violence towards women that you are seeing is related to Islamic violence against women? Unfortunately,
the area of London, so we work pan-London, but some of the areas that I focus on are the demographics are heavily Islamic, and so it's very mad that I see kind of smaller aspects of what we see in the testimonies of grooming gang victim survivors when they say things like, you know, he quoted the Quran as he beat me. I see Muslim wives say the same thing when we're doing the risk assessments with them and we're asking like about the last incidents of abuse or what's happened. So you do see very similar like Islamic parallels when relating to abuse, which is why I speak out so openly, because the Quran itself codifies and sanctions domestic abuse. Like it's there in Surah 434. It's one of the ways to discipline your wife. So it's no surprise that it's going to be part and parcel of the abuse a lot of Muslim women do experience. And then I know Sadiq Khan denies it, but I also see semblances of in London, there is a stark pattern which is similar to other heavily Muslim populated areas around the country where Muslim, usually Pakistani men are preying on vulnerable white English girls. I'm talking about girls who have substance misuse problems or from council estates, and they're using similar lines. But of course, in this sector, that is a stark problem, but I see abuse from, you know, it's colorblind and religion blind and culture blind. It's across the board.
So two of the phenomenons that are being widely reported, and that right-wingers, conservatives, have been reporting for in some cases a few decades is two practices that were completely alien to Europe before mass migration, and that is female genital mutilation, and the other one is honor-based killings and violence, and both of these obviously affect not white European girls, but they affect the daughters of people who've come from predominantly Muslim countries. Are these two things that you've seen a lot of, Nuriyah?
Yes. I'm grateful that we've got like female genital mutilation protection orders and things like that now in the law, and you can get protection orders for these. But if you just look at how, like, I think there's been 1 or 2 convictions since it's come out in the 80s. And we've got organizations who have to work predominantly on this aspect. Like I said, again, in areas of London, which are largely Muslim demographics. But the thing I really struggle with is that whenever they're doing advocacy on this kind of concept, they're never making the link with Islam. You know, where you can tell that FGM, for example, predominantly affects the Somali community.
Sure.
Yet, every Somali organization that comes forward in their pamphlet or brochure, the first thing they say is that this is not a Somali exclusive problem, this is not an Islam problem. And so you're never really tackling the root cause. And because of the inner policing of communities, nobody's really, you know, telling on somebody that is about to be taken aboard for FGM. And you have to be so careful and even try and educate social workers and say, look, if you're seeing a little girl from Somalia being taken to see an aunt for 2 months in the middle of a school year, that should raise alarm bells for you. You know, it's not just...
So could you talk me through how do the people who take their daughters to have female genital mutilation conducted on them, how would they go about making it happen? Is it happening? Is any of it actually taking place physically in the UK?
It was largely up until like a decade ago. And then obviously because the law came in, it really clamped down that anybody even seen assisting or, you know, kind of being any part of the conversation, let alone performing the surgery, will be arrested.
Where surgery really is too kind of a word. I mean, it's mutilation.
It's absolutely mutilation. Yeah. Obviously you've got from like type 1 to type 4.
Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, so I'm not a specialist in it, thankfully, because I don't work directly with FGM patients, but type 4 is the worst kind.
Okay.
I think it's where the entire clit is cut with the hood of it and everything. Type 1, they're all awful, and they're all going to cause issues, lifelong issues, especially with pregnancy and being able to enjoy sex and all these things, and even little things like going to the bathroom. But type 1 is like essentially, I think, the clit being cut, all the way to type 4, where the clit and the entire outer labia is cut and then sewn up. So yeah, it's those are the degrees that it can go to.
And this is something that was physically happening in the United Kingdom.
It was, yes, yeah.
Until it was clamped down on.
Yeah.
And now the only way and this is again, this really is largely a Somali problem.
Yeah.
And now, and obviously the Somali community, the United Kingdom is home to, I believe, a few 100,000 Somalis. It's one of the larger diasporas of the Somali people is here in the United Kingdom. So now they take these young girls back and do it in Somalia.
Yeah, and thankfully you'll be arrested for even doing that now. So this is why I'm saying, like, if you...
and you could be arrested before even leaving if the authorities suspect that it's going to happen.
Yes, and you'll get something which is called an FGMPO, Female Genital Mutilation Protection Order, which means that child will be kind of alerted at the airport and they won't be able to leave the country because it is on suspicion that they're going to visit a distant family member or relative for a elongated period of time, ad hoc in the middle of a school year or something, which is the main indicator that we work off of. If we see that, because the general rule of thumb is that a mother who has been cut, as they say, is more likely to want her daughters to be cut. Whereas a mother that has, for some reason, or thankfully been able to get away from being cut, she also safeguards her daughters, and they make excuses and they don't let it happen. So it is very much like a kind of
self-perpetuating evil that if you've been affected, you're more likely to
exactly
to inflict it on others.
Yeah.
And honor-based killings, this is something that it shocked public opinion that there was a few very violent cases that took place across Europe. And this is something that Europeans found out about, again, due to mass migration from Muslim countries. How common is that in your line of work? How many cases are there? Could you tell us about some of that?
Yeah, so some of the organizations that are mainstream today that are doing the most important work exist because of the most horrific cases. So a lot of them were before I was born, thankfully. We had a case of a Kurdish woman, Banaz, I think her name was. And again, just for choosing a boyfriend of her own choosing and leaving a forced marriage, she was literally murdered to death, axed by her own father and brothers and buried wherever they lived in the UK. So there were literally being bodies of, women from Pakistani backgrounds, Kurdish backgrounds, Islamic backgrounds, essentially, for these dishonor killings. And they would end up in parking lots and these kind of places in the UK until the police caught up, safeguarding caught up, and they realized what honor-based abuse was. Thankfully, now it is part and parcel of our risk assessments, and it's very much like at the forefront of every person who works in this sector. It's at the forefront of their mind that, there's a whole layer of cultural sensitivities that a Western police mind might not understand. So what they consider just a domestic issue in an Islamic family, that could mean she's rejecting a marriage proposal or she's refusing a forced marriage. So essentially that means that there is the potential for that to lead to honor-based abuse, because even with so many of these infamous cases in the UK, when they had approached the police saying, I'm literally going to be killed tonight by my father, he said he's going to kill me, the police didn't take it seriously. And so you had organizations like Southall Black Sisters come up, ICRO, which focuses on the rights of Iranian, Kurdish and Afghan women, just to understand their cultural sensitivities that, a normal Met police officer rocking up your doorstep might not take as seriously because he doesn't understand what's happening behind closed doors. So you have to really now, like, for example, when I was growing up, thankfully it changed so much that even when I would be flying back to the UAE, just to go on holiday after I was here at university, the police would stop me and at the airport and take me to the side just because of my demographic and say, are you being forced to travel? Is there someone you're being forced to marry on the other side? And I thought, no, I'm literally just going to go for a nice holiday to see my parents. But wow, thank you for checking on me. And they would give me a card and say, if you ever are in trouble, do this. And you're taught little weird tricks, like put a spoon in your underpants so that it sets off the security alarm and you're not forced to go through the airport. So there has been a lot of awareness since I've been working in this sector and since I've come back, but it took some horrific cases. I mean, if you read the Banaz case, Banaz Mahmood, I think her name was, you'll be horrified to know the way that they mutilated her and killed her within the UK.
And all of this, as you're saying these things, I suppose the first thing that comes to my mind is if we didn't have mass migration, we wouldn't be dealing with any of these problems, and British police and European police forces wouldn't even have to deal with any form of sensitivity training. Sort of my conservative mind sends me straight to the obvious solution, which would be mass deportations. But obviously, that's obviously sort of, I'm saying this, as a sort of semi response. I suppose one of the things that is of particular interest to me in all of this is are these things becoming more prevalent as the demographics of the United Kingdom and of France and of Spain and Italy and Sweden and Germany, as these places are changing, and we're seeing increasing amounts of, for example, there's several hundred schools in the United Kingdom where white English children are a minority. I think there's 72 schools in which there are no white English children at all. I suppose the question I'm asking is, are the Muslims, second and third generation, becoming more radical, or are they becoming, like you, Nuriyah, more liberal and more critical of Islam and more fearful of Islamists? I mean, I suppose you, coming from a Muslim background, have and having left the Muslim faith, you're much more fearful of Islam because you know what Islamism is, right? What is your take on that? Do you think that second and third generation Muslims, from your experience, are they less radical, more radical?
That's a very interesting question. It's kind of like there's moving parts to it, so it's hard to answer in like one go. But for example, with the men, I mostly think like, you know, when even if they're just sent to a mosque, by virtue of like their dad being religious a little bit, or like them hearing the Friday sermons, and what's going on in the world, they cling to their religion more. When I work with like second, third generation British women like myself, but British like Bengali or British Afghan, they're coming to us for support because they know that their rights have been violated, but they're still very much within the fold of Islam and they believe it. So they know that something's wrong only because they're British and they know that the law is on their side, but they've gone through this whole ordeal as if you would back home, essentially. And then they finally reached out to us. So for women, it's a more of a mixed bag, because even when they've gone through that, most of them don't leave their religion. They're still kind of wearing the hijab and wearing the abaya, and they're British born. Do you know what I mean? But it's just like, okay, at least because you've gone through the education system and you know that there's some kind of abuse being perpetuated on you, that you know that there's services that you can go to for help. But that doesn't reduce their level of religiosity or their cultural allegiance, if that makes sense, which is a huge issue for me, because, you know, if Islam is being one of the root causes of why you've suffered in such a strong way, you would think that at some level you would question that. I've had 1 or 2 cases recently where women have come to me and said that they might not be believers anymore. One of them, she was a lesbian, so it was only logical. And I was like, yes, okay, whatever it takes. But yeah, few and far between.
So do you think that fundamentally second and third generation Muslims have not assimilated into, specifically to our conversation, the United Kingdom and more generally to Europe and European values?
Yeah, I fear that they are happy to indulge in the European British values for the perks that it offers them.
Without any of the responsibilities? Yes,
and deep down without any of the true loyalties or, you know, actual belief in like the real things that the values espouse. It's more just, how can we do these to maintain preaching about what we believe in? So it is kind of like the allegiance is still, when I mentioned the othering earlier in the conversation, it was like they are still on that side of the othering. It takes a lot for that to break down and truly, you know, be like, I'm British first and then Muslim second, or Kurdish second, or Pakistani second, or Afghan second.
Is it a strange feeling for you to be criticizing the very background and in some ways even the ethnicity that you're from? How does that make you feel? Seeing all of the problems of the country that you're from, of the faith that you're from.
It's kind of like, feels like being awake in the matrix, if that makes sense, because a lot of people are, you know, just stuck within this, you know, is it culture, is it religion, and they can't get out of that. And that you're always operating at a level of cognitive dissonance where you're like, why does this community have so many issues? Why are these, you know, more represented? Why are we overrepresented here? Well, if you connect the dots, you see for what it is and you can step outside. So to be honest, I sleep very peacefully at night because I can say the whole barrel is rotten. The ideology itself is rotten. I don't have to make excuses for what the alleged prophet did. I don't have to make excuses for why Islam fits in with Western values. I can say it doesn't, and I'll land my plane there. You know, I don't have to try and that to me is a very harsh place to be in, especially to like, people do it. I mean, thankfully my parents are very British as well. Like they love quintessentially British things. And I think that's made me who I am today. And they've taught me and shown me a lot of that. But there are families who are completely away from that, and they are existing within this enclave, and they have to sleep at night thinking, well, the British government here has given us this life, we're taking benefits from them, we're living off them, and yet deep down we have a hatred, and all we really care about is the destruction of the Zionist entity. Do you know what I mean? It's a very hard place to exist in.
As my final question, one of my favorite films, it might come as a surprise, is Four Lions. Now, Four Lions, for the people who don't know, is a British comedy about 4 hapless terrorists, would-be terrorists rather, who are trying to hash out a plot. You've seen this film.
Absolutely, and many times, too many times.
Tell me about how accurate. Tell the viewers about what the film is.
Oh,
I mean, it almost could become an advert for 4 lines. It's a fantastic comedy.
Yeah, if you haven't watched it, please watch it, because sadly, it's a horrific thing to say, but there's so many 4-line wannabes potentially up and down the UK. You know, you go to...
So these 4 chaps who decide that they're going to commit an act of terror.
Yeah.
And it's all obviously very tongue-in-cheek, but actually some of the things that... One of my favorite lines is when they're trying to pick a target. And one of them, I can't remember which of the characters it is adamant that they should bomb the mosque, radicalize the moderates, speed up jihad, and sort of unite the ummah against the infidel. Which is sort of... Because some of the comedy in it is actually... It's a very well-written film, and it actually has a deeply tragic conclusion with one of them ends up, to spoil the film, one of them does end up blowing himself up. I believe he blows himself up in a vape shop or something.
Yeah.
Something really, or a corner shop. I mean, it ends up, I think, killing another
More
Muslim.
than one of them actually end up
Is it more than one of them?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the film in a while. But how accurate is that film?
No, it's...
In terms of reflecting the stereotypes and the community, if you will.
Disturbingly accurate. I mean, you've got 4 seemingly British lads, you know, grown up in Britain, really not got many qualms with Britain itself, except for the fact that their religion tells them they should have a higher purpose, which is to destroy or send a big message of, you know, an FU to the infidels, if you will. So they go off to training camps in Pakistan, Afghanistan to learn the ropes from real terrorists and try and use those tactics back here in England. They spend their entire time, what could be a very, you know, normal, happy life in England doing something worthwhile, but they spend their entire time plotting, scheming, and trying to gather more youngsters to come on this mission of theirs and essentially blow up
the place that has given them a home.
Exactly, and kill innocent people in the process. And they also struggle with that, like, these are innocent people and yet we kill them, and we're trying to kill them. And there's even that one, really sorry for the spoilers, but there's that one infamous scene where they're in a university lecture and one of the young recruits says a rap and then says Allahu Akbar and opens up his jacket as if he's going to blow it up and says, oh, what? Why are you all scared? You think I was going to do something, yeah? But I mean, if you hear Allahu Akbar on the train, if you hear someone see someone pulling out their Quran, or the call to prayer goes off, I'm sorry, even when I was a Muslim, I would get off the train. Do you know what I mean? So there's a reason why those words set an alarm bells off in people. But yeah, that film encapsulates it very well. Sad to say, Stefan, but I actually have friends at university who took a similar path.
Wow.
So it rings true for a lot of people when they're dissatisfied or they're begruntled with something in this country. They think that Sharia is the answer or Islam is the answer, and they go to Egypt or Kashmir or Afghanistan to go and, you know, find those answers from real mentors and bring that mentality back here.
Nuriyah Khan, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.